In 1958, an American art dealer named Daniel Henry Kahnweiler sold a small Picasso painting for $5,000. The buyer was a private collector who understood something that most investors of the time did not, that Pablo Picasso was not just an artist. He was an appreciating asset. That painting was Les Femmes d'Alger, version O. In 2015, it sold at Christie's New York for $179 million. The appreciation over 57 years was approximately 34,000%. Welcome back to Capital Above Convention. Today we are going beyond theory and into the real world of art as an investment, through some of the most extraordinary case studies in the history of the art market. These are not outliers designed to seduce you into buying art you cannot afford. They are data points that illuminate how the art market actually creates value and what distinguishes the investors who captured that value from those who did not. Let's start with Picasso, because no single artist better illustrates the mechanics of art investment returns than Pablo Picasso. Picasso produced approximately 20,000 works across his lifetime. Paintings, prints, sculptures, ceramics. He died in 1973. Since his death, his work has never stopped appreciating. The reason is the combination of factors we discussed in our earlier video on the art market: scarcity, institutional validation, the death premium, and the passion premium, all operating simultaneously on a body of work that is universally recognized as among the most significant in human history. But Picasso is only the most famous example. The art market is full of extraordinary appreciation stories, some well-known, many quietly buried in the provenance records of works that have never appeared in a headline. What they share is a set of common characteristics that any serious investor can identify and use to build a framework for evaluating art as an asset. Let us look at 3 more case studies that illustrate different mechanisms of art market value creation. The first is Jean-Michel Basquiat. In 1984, a painting by the young Brooklyn-born artist sold at auction for $19,000. Basquiat was 23 years old, already generating significant attention in the New York downtown art scene, but far from the globally recognized name he would become. That painting, untitled, sold at Sotheby's New York in 2017 for $110 million. The buyer was Yusaku Maezawa, a Japanese billionaire and art collector who understood that Basquiat's position in art history was not yet fully priced into the market. What drove that appreciation? 3 things. Basquiat's death in 1988 at 27 permanently fixed his supply. The growing recognition of his work by major museums, MoMA, the Guggenheim, the Fondation Louis Vuitton, provided the institutional validation that converts a talented artist into a blue-chip investment. And the growing collector base of ultra-high net worth individuals in Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America brought new demand to a fixed supply. The result was an appreciation of more than 5,000% over 33 years. The second case study is Andy Warhol. Warhol is the most transacted artist in auction history by volume. His works are highly liquid. There is almost always a buyer and a seller for a major Warhol at any major auction house on any given season. This liquidity makes Warhol a fundamentally different investment from, say, a mid-career artist whose market is thinner. Shot Sage Blue Marilyn, one of Warhol's silkscreen portraits of Marilyn Monroe, sold at Christie's in May 2022 for $195 million, making it the most expensive work by an American artist ever sold at auction. It had previously changed hands for a fraction of that price in the 1990s. The appreciation reflected not just Warhol's enduring cultural relevance, but the increasing recognition of his work as a store of value by a new generation of ultra-wealthy collectors. The third case study is more instructive because it involves an artist who was not yet famous when the investment was made. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, a small group of London-based art dealers and collectors began buying the work of a group of young British artists who were making provocative, conceptually ambitious work that the establishment largely dismissed. These artists Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, Sarah Lucas, Gary Hume, among others, became known as the Young British Artists, or YBAs. The collectors who bought their work early paid hundreds or thousands of pounds per piece. Charles Saatchi was the most famous of these early collectors. His purchases of YBA work in the early 1990s, the prices that seemed extravagant to some and trivial to others, proved to be among the most prescient collecting decisions of the late 20th century. Works he acquired for tens of thousands of pounds are now worth tens of millions. What made these investments so extraordinary was not luck. It was a rigorous analytical framework applied by people who understood how the art market creates value, who understood that institutional validation, critical consensus, and museum acquisition are the mechanisms that transform promising artists into blue chip assets. Saatchi and his contemporaries did not buy what they liked. They bought what they understood was positioned to be validated by the institutions that set the price of art history. This is the key lesson from art investment case studies. The extraordinary returns are not random. They are the product of a consistent set of factors: artist positioning, institutional momentum, supply scarcity, and global collector demand that can be identified, evaluated, and acted upon by investors who take the time to understand them. So what does this mean practically for investors who are not Charles Saatchi and do not have access to the studios of young artists in East London? The first lesson is that the art market rewards patience and research above all else. The investors who captured the extraordinary returns we have discussed today were not trading art. They were holding it for years, for decades, through periods when the works in their collection generated no income and were carried entirely as a long-term bet on cultural history. This is patient capital in its most concentrated form. The second lesson is that the art market has distinct tiers with very different risk and return profiles. Blue chip works by established artists, Picasso, Warhol, Basquiat, Hirst, offer lower risk and more predictable appreciation, but require very significant capital. Mid-career artists with strong institutional momentum offer higher potential returns and lower entry costs, but carry more risk. Emerging artists offer the highest potential returns and the lowest entry costs, but also the highest probability of zero. The third lesson is that access is changing. The Picasso and Warhol case studies involve works that sold for tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, well beyond the reach of most investors. But platforms like Masterworks are now securitizing blue chip works and allowing investors to buy fractional shares at minimums of a few $100s. This is not yet the same as owning a Picasso directly, but it provides exposure to the same asset class, the same return drivers, and the same diversification benefits at a fraction of the cost. The art market has created more extraordinary wealth than almost any other alternative asset class in history. The Picasso that sold for $5,000 and became worth $179 million is not a fantasy. It is a documented transaction, one of thousands of similar stories buried in the auction records of Sotheby's, Christie's, and Phillips going back decades. The question is not whether art can generate exceptional returns. The evidence is overwhelming that it can. The question is whether you are positioned to capture those returns, or whether you will spend the rest of your life reading about them. Subscribe to Capital Above Convention for weekly deep dives into the assets, structures, and strategies that the world's most sophisticated investors use to build and protect wealth. And I'll see you in the next one.